Alexander Reed, a cold-hearted CEO who doesn't believe in love, is forced to hire Sophia Mitchell as his fake wife to appease his mother. But when real feelings start to emerge, can they break free from the contract, or will they lose each other forever? A captivating love story awaits. Alexander Reed is the kind of man who commands attention the moment he walks into a room. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches with a strong chiseled jawline and piercing green eyes, he exudes the power and authority of a young CEO. At just 29, he has taken Reed Industries to new heights, expanding its reach and securing million-dollar deals that no one thought possible. But with that success comes arrogance and attachment. Alexander never lets emotions interfere with his decisions. Since childhood, Alexander had witnessed his parents' marriage fall apart. His father, Jonathan Reed, a ruthless businessman, betrayed his mother, running off with a younger model and leaving Victoria Reed to raise Alexander alone. That betrayal cemented Alexander's belief that love was nothing more than an illusion. To him, marriage was simply a contractual arrangement, nothing more, nothing less. However, his mother Victoria Reed saw things differently. A sharp, formidable woman who never lost in negotiations, Victoria believed that her son was not just an heir, but the future of their empire, and to be a proper successor, he needed a stable family. She wanted Alexander to settle down to keep him from becoming an emotionless workaholic. When Alexander repeatedly refused every setup Victoria arranged, she gave him an ultimatum. "If you don't get married within a year, I will strip you of your inheritance." For the first time, Alexander felt cornered. It wasn't about the money. His personal wealth was more than enough to live lavishly forever, but he refused to let his mother manipulate him. The question was, how could he convince her without actually getting married? Meanwhile, in a world far from Alexander's luxurious lifestyle, Sophia Mitchell was struggling to survive. At 25, Sophia had long, wavy brown hair and warm brown eyes. She wasn't the type to turn heads in a crowd, but there was something about her, an undeniable charm that made people feel at ease. She was quick-witted, resourceful, and always carried a smile, though few knew the heavy burdens she bore. Her life had been ordinary until tragedy struck 4 years ago. Her parents died in a car accident, leaving her with not just grief, but a mountain of debt they hadn't paid off. Once a literature student dreaming of becoming a novelist, Sophia was forced to drop out of college and work non-stop just to stay afloat. Now she worked as a waitress in a small sandwich shop, earning just enough to cover rent and food, while still trying to write in the late hours when the cafe emptied out. Her life was predictable until she met Alexander Reed. That morning was especially busy. The tiny sandwich shop was packed, and Sophia was rushing between tables, taking orders and delivering food. When she reached the counter, she noticed a tall man standing there, phone in hand, his expression irritated, as if he had just dealt with an unpleasant business deal. "Good morning, sir. What would you like?" she asked with a polite smile. The man looked up, and for a brief second, Sophia was caught off guard. His piercing green eyes studied her, sharp and assessing. He had an air of danger, intensely attractive but unapproachable. "Black coffee, no sugar," he said, his voice deep and commanding. Sophia nodded and quickly made his order, but less than a minute later, she heard his irritated voice again. "What is this?" She turned back to see Alexander holding his coffee, looking unimpressed. "Your coffee?" she replied. "I said no sugar." "And there isn't any sugar," Sophia crossed her arms. "I made it myself. You can taste it." Alexander held her gaze for a moment before taking a sip. After a brief pause, he set the cup down, the corners of his lips curling slightly. "Fine. At least you know how to do your job properly." Sophia rolled her eyes, but said nothing. She had dealt with difficult customers before. Another rich, entitled businessman wasn't anything new. But in that brief moment, an idea sparked in Alexander's mind. She was ordinary, not someone who would attract too much attention. Yet she had a strong personality, unaffected by money or status. She could be the perfect person to play the role of his wife without unnecessary complications. A crazy plan began to take shape. That evening, just as Sophia was finishing her shift, a sleek luxury car pulled up outside the cafe. She frowned as Alexander Reed stepped out. His sharp green eyes locked onto hers with purpose. "I have a proposal for you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "A proposal?" Sophia folded her arms. If it's about coffee, I don't serve it after hours. Alexander smirked slightly. It's not about coffee. I want you to pretend to be my wife. Sophia stared at him, dumbfounded. Excuse me? I need a fake wife to convince my mother. You'll be well compensated. All you have to do is play the role. After a year, you'll be free. Sophia laughed in disbelief, shaking her head. Do I look like a bad actress to you? No, Alexander said, his gaze unwavering. I think you're someone who needs money. Sophia stiffened. He wasn't wrong. Her debt weighed on her every single day, and if his offer was as generous as he claimed, it could solve her financial problems. But could she really pretend to be married to a cold, arrogant man like him? She met his piercing green gaze, feeling as if she were standing at a crossroads in her life. After a long pause, Sophia took a deep breath and said, I agree. 1 week after signing the contract, Sophia moved into Alexander's mansion. The estate, located in an exclusive neighborhood, was modern and extravagant. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a sprawling garden. Everything was meticulously designed, as if it had been taken straight from an interior design magazine. But to Sophia, it felt cold, lacking the warmth of a true home. From the very first day, she felt stifled by Alexander's way of living. He was a man of routine, obsessed with order and precision. Everything in the house was perfectly arranged with no room for disruption. Sophia, on the other hand, thrived in spontaneity and comfort, unused to such rigid rules. The next morning, she walked into the kitchen barefoot, wearing an oversized t-shirt, and opened the fridge in search of breakfast. What do you think you're doing? A deep, icy voice cut through the air. Sophia turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway, arms crossed, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, as if he were about to walk into an important meeting. I'm looking for something to eat. Isn't this my house, too? She replied, raising an eyebrow. Alexander stepped forward, pulling open the fridge door. You've rearranged everything. Sophia blinked. Rearranged? I just took out some milk and bread. Alexander let out a sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. This arrangement was going to be more difficult than he thought. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a sigh. Listen, I like everything in its place. If you want to live here, you have to respect the rules. Sophia crossed her arms, a smirk playing on her lips. Your rules? Fine, Mr. Perfectionist. I'll try not to mess up your perfect little world. Alexander frowned but said nothing. Instead, he poured himself a cup of coffee and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Sophia shaking her head in frustration. She didn't know how long she could endure this, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't let Alexander Reed control her so easily. Just 2 days after Sophia moved in, Victoria made an unexpected visit. She stepped into the mansion with the aura of a powerful woman, her sharp eyes scanning every corner before settling on Sophia. Sophia, you look absolutely radiant, Victoria smiled, though there was an unmistakable undertone to it. Married life with Alexander must be wonderful, isn't it? Sophia quickly plastered on a sweet smile. Yes, it's been great. Alexander, standing beside her, tilted his head slightly, scrutinizing her as if assessing how well she could play her role. Victoria wasn't easily fooled. She eyed them with suspicion. Oh, have you two gotten used to living together? Sophia felt her heartbeat quicken. If she showed even the slightest hesitation, Victoria would catch on immediately. Suddenly, Alexander wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. Of course, Mom. Sophia is an amazing wife. Sophia stiffened, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. She had to remind herself to stay calm, as Alexander gave her waist a light squeeze, as if silently urging her to play along. Victoria observed them for a long moment before finally smiling in approval. Good. I'm looking forward to your anniversary celebration. Sophia swallowed hard. An anniversary celebration? That meant they'd have to keep pretending in front of even more people. The moment Victoria left, Sophia immediately pushed Alexander away and glared at him. What the hell was that? Alexander simply shrugged, as if holding her had been nothing more than a casual gesture. Just helping you stay in character. Sophia bit her lip, her heart still beating faster than it should. But she quickly reminded herself this was just a game she couldn't afford to mistake for reality. A week later, as Sophia was walking down the stairs with a box of documents in her arms, she suddenly lost her footing. Everything happened too fast. She braced herself for a painful fall, but instead of hitting the ground, she landed in a pair of strong arms. Sophia opened her eyes, and right in front of her was Alexander's striking face. He had caught her just in time, holding her securely against him. For a few seconds, they just stared at each other. Alexander still hadn't let go, and Sophia could feel his warm breath near her cheek. Her heart pounded erratically. Why was she feeling nervous? It was just a minor accident. Alexander was the first to break the silence. "You should be more careful." His voice was low and husky. But instead of releasing her immediately, he held on to her for a moment longer, as if even he was surprised by his own reaction. Finally, Sophia gently pushed him away, trying to mask her flustered state. "Got it, thanks." She turned and walked off, but the warmth of his touch still lingered. No matter how much she tried to ignore it, Sophia couldn't help but notice that Alexander seemed different lately. He wasn't as cold as before. Occasionally, she caught him looking at her with an unreadable expression. Alexander, too, had started paying more attention to her. He no longer scolded her whenever she misplaced things in the house. Once, when she got lost on her way to the supermarket, he didn't get annoyed. He just sighed and drove over to pick her up without a single complaint. She wasn't sure what was happening between them, until one night when Sophia came down with a high fever. Alexander stayed up all night taking care of her. He placed a cold compress on her forehead, helped her take her medicine, and even held her hand while she drifted in and out of sleep. When she woke up, she found Alexander asleep next to her bed, his hand still wrapped around hers. Her heart skipped a beat. For the first time, she began to wonder, was this still just a contract marriage, or had something real started to change? Alexander Reed was not the kind of man who let emotions get the best of him. At least, that's what he always believed. But lately, things weren't as simple as they used to be. He found himself noticing Sophia in ways he never had before. At first, he convinced himself it was all part of the contract. He needed to make sure she played the perfect wife. But when he saw her laughing with another man, that excuse suddenly felt meaningless. That night, they attended a charity event sponsored by Reed Industries. Alexander was busy entertaining business partners, but his gaze kept wandering across the room, searching for Sophia. And when he finally spotted her, an unfamiliar irritation settled in his chest. She was standing beside a young businessman, well-dressed, charming, and clearly enjoying their conversation. Sophia smiled, and something about that smile made Alexander clench his jaw. Without thinking, he strode toward them. "Sophia." His voice was sharper than usual. She turned to him, startled by his tense expression. "Alexander." Before she could say anything else, he placed a hand on her waist and pulled her close. Then, turning to the other man, he spoke in a deep, commanding tone. "Thanks for keeping my wife entertained, but I think it's time she came back to me." The man raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Sophia, caught off guard, didn't react right away, too busy processing the warmth of Alexander's hand on her waist. She had never seen him act like this before. Once they were away from the crowd, Sophia frowned up at him. "Alexander, what the hell was that?" "Sticking to the role," he replied curtly, though even he wasn't sure if that was the real reason. After that night, Sophia noticed a shift in Alexander's behavior. He started remembering little details about her, how she liked her coffee with 2 sugars, how she hated onions in her food, how she always read before bed. One afternoon, after a long day at work, Sophia came home to find a small box on the kitchen counter. She opened it and found strawberry tarts, her favorite. Turning to Alexander, who was casually reading a document on the couch, she raised an eyebrow. "Did you buy these?" Without looking up, he simply said, "Yeah." She crossed her arms. "Why?" This time he did look up, his usually cold green eyes holding a rare softness. "Because you like them." Sophia felt her heart skip a beat. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply opened the box and took a bite of the pastry. But as the sweetness of the strawberries melted on her tongue, she realized one thing. Alexander wasn't just a fake husband. He was slowly becoming an important part of her life. A month later, during a grand party hosted by Reed Corporation, Alexander and Sophia found themselves in yet another unexpected situation. As usual, Victoria made her entrance with a scrutinizing gaze. She never fully trusted this marriage, and Alexander knew she was looking for any sign that could prove they were just putting on an act. Everything was going smoothly until an old family friend approached them, his tone laced with curiosity. You two make such a lovely couple, but to be honest, I've never actually seen you display any affection publicly. Alexander, you've never kissed your wife in front of everyone, have you? Sophia froze. So did Alexander. The people around them started paying attention, and Sophia could feel Victoria's piercing gaze on them. Alexander gently squeezed her hand. You don't mind, do you? Before she could react, he leaned in. His lips met hers, gentle yet possessive. Sophia's eyes widened, but within seconds, she forgot that this was supposed to be just an act. His lips were soft, yet there was a firm determination behind them. He wasn't just pretending, he was truly kissing her. And the most surprising part? She found herself kissing him back. When Alexander finally pulled away, the room erupted into applause, but Sophia couldn't hear anything. All she could feel was the wild rhythm of her heartbeat and the way Alexander's deep gaze never left hers. This was no longer just a game. After that kiss, Sophia found herself afraid. She kept reminding herself that this was just a contract. Once the year ended, so would everything between them. But if that were true, why did it hurt to think about that day? She tried to keep her distance from Alexander, not wanting to get swept away by her emotions. But ironically, Alexander did the opposite. He sought her out, sat next to her when she read, asked about her day as if he truly cared. She didn't know what was happening between them, but one thing was certain. Her heart was no longer pretending. Sophia had tried to convince herself that she could maintain a safe distance from Alexander, that she wouldn't let her feelings take over. But every small gesture of his, every glance, every accidental touch was enough to make her heart flutter. She knew she had fallen for him, but it didn't matter because this was just a contract. Things became even more complicated when another woman entered their lives. That night, as Sophia descended the stairs, she heard a woman's voice echoing from the living room. Alexander, I missed you. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. From where she stood, she saw a stunning blonde woman with deep blue eyes. She stood before Alexander, her expression filled with emotion. Alexander crossed his arms, his voice cold. What are you doing here, Rebecca? Rebecca. The name rang in Sophia's mind like an alarm. I heard you got married. Rebecca tilted her head, a smirk playing on her lips. Really, Alexander? You, the man who always said he didn't believe in love, actually got married? Sophia held her breath. That has nothing to do with you, Alexander said flatly. Oh, but I find it fascinating. Rebecca stepped closer, placing a hand on Alexander's chest, her gaze knowing. Do you love her, or is this just another one of your games? Sophia's heart clenched. She didn't wait to hear Alexander's response. She turned and walked away, but not before hearing Rebecca's amused chuckle. If this is just a contract, then why are you playing the role so well? After that night, Sophia could no longer look at Alexander the same way. She started to wonder, was she just a pawn in his game? Had he ever truly been sincere with her, or was he just trying to keep up appearances for his mother's sake? She began keeping her distance. She no longer had breakfast with him, no longer spoke with him in the evenings, and avoided him whenever possible. When Alexander tried to start a conversation, she responded with short, detached answers. He noticed the change in her, and he hated it. One evening, he walked into her study and found her packing up her books. Sophia. He stood in front of her, his voice low. You're avoiding me. She didn't look at him. I don't know what you're talking about. Alexander narrowed his eyes. You've been like this ever since Rebecca showed up. Why? Sophia tightened her grip on the book in her hands. Because she was right, wasn't she? Alexander frowned. Right about what? She finally met his gaze, her eyes glistening. I'm just part of this contract, nothing more, nothing less. Alexander stiffened. He had never imagined Sophia would doubt him like this, and he didn't know what to say because he himself was conflicted. She let out a shaky laugh. Alexander, you were never serious about me, were you? He opened his mouth, about to say something, but nothing came out. And Sophia understood. His silence was her answer. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind a tangled mess. She had feelings for Alexander, but she couldn't stay if it would only end up hurting her. She had to leave. The next morning, when Alexander woke up, Sophia was gone. Her wedding ring sat silently on the table. Alexander stared at it, his mind blank. She was gone, and he didn't know if he could bring her back. The house felt emptier than ever. Alexander never thought Sophia could leave behind such a gaping void. No more soft footsteps in the morning, no more scent of coffee she brewed, no more late-night conversations. He felt a loss he couldn't quite describe, and then a truth hit him like a powerful wave. He loved her. Not because of the contract, not because of his mother's pressure, but because of her strength, her kindness, and all the little things she brought into his life. Alexander had never known this feeling before, and he hated it. He had to find her. He searched everywhere for Sophia, but she had disappeared. It wasn't until he received a letter from her lawyer that he learned she had moved to another city to pursue her dream of becoming a writer. Alexander clenched the letter in his hand, his heart pounding. He couldn't let her go like this, because without Sophia by his side, everything felt meaningless. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt truly powerless. He, a man known for his cold demeanor, logic, and control, now stood before the door of a small apartment in another city, his heart racing like a lovesick teenager. When Sophia left, he thought he could forget her, but with each passing day he realized his life was incomplete without her. He missed the way she furrowed her brows while reading, the way she laughed when teasing him, and even the way she argued with him, stubborn yet utterly endearing. He had spent 2 weeks searching for her, and now he was here. Alexander took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Footsteps sounded from inside, and the door opened. Sophia stood there, her hair tied up in a casual ponytail, wearing an oversized sweater and simple jeans. She looked different from the last time he saw her, lighter, freer, but her eyes still held a hint of caution. She froze at the sight of him. Alexander. For a moment, Alexander said nothing, just looking at her. She was just as beautiful as he remembered. She was still the Sophia he loved. Then, in a low, steady voice, he said, "I don't care about the contract anymore." Sophia blinked in confusion. Alexander stepped closer, his voice more certain this time. "I'm not here because of my mother. I'm not here for anyone else. I'm here for you." Sophia opened her mouth to say something, but Alexander gently took her hand. "Sophia, I love you." Her heart pounded. She wanted to believe him, but fear still lingered. "Alexander, you don't have to do this. We have no obligations anymore," she said, her voice trembling. Alexander shook his head. "I'm not doing this because of any obligation. I'm doing this because I can't live without you." She searched his eyes, looking for sincerity. Alexander took a deep breath and said the most important words of all. "If I have to, I'll give up the company, give up everything just to have you by my side." His words washed away every doubt in Sophia's heart. He truly loved her. A sob escaped her lips as tears welled up in her eyes. Alexander gently wiped away the tear that rolled down her cheek. "Sophia, come back with me." She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. And in that instant, they both knew they had found each other, not because of a contract, but because of real love. A few months later, a grand wedding was held at the Reed estate. Dressed in an elegant white gown, Sophia stood before the mirror, still in disbelief that she was about to marry Alexander for real this time. The door to the dressing room opened, and Victoria Reed stepped inside. The powerful woman who had once forced her son into marriage now looked at Sophia with nothing but warmth. "You truly changed him," Victoria said gently, stepping forward and taking Sophia's hands. Sophia hesitated. "I don't know if I'm good enough." Victoria chuckled. "You're the only one who can make him smile, Sophia, and that is more than enough." Those words filled Sophia's heart with emotion. As the wedding march began, Alexander stood at the end of the aisle, his eyes locked solely on her. When she finally reached him, he took her hand and held it firmly. No more contracts, no more lies, only love. They exchanged vows, and when Alexander leaned in to kiss her, Sophia knew this was the happiness she had been searching for all along. True love can start in the most unexpected ways, and they were proof of that. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more meaningful stories like this one.